My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 32 years old, and I can still feel the echo of that icy dread that coiled in my stomach the day Mr. Henderson, my boss, called me into his glass-walled office. It was supposed to be a triumphant day, or at least the beginning of one. The Phoenix Initiative, the project I had conceived, nurtured, and bled for over 2 relentless years, was on the cusp of its final presentation to the board and our key investors. I'd lived and breathed Phoenix. I'd sketched its architecture on napkins at 2 a.m., I'd debugged its financial models until my eyes burned, I'd defended its potential in countless meetings where I was the only woman at the table, often talked over, often dismissed, until my data became undeniable. But when I walked into Henderson's office that Tuesday morning, the air was wrong. It was thick with a cloying, insincere politeness that immediately set my nerves on edge. And then I saw him, Mark Jenkins, Henderson's golden boy, sitting there with that infuriatingly smug half-smile he always wore, like he was privy to some cosmic joke the rest of us weren't smart enough to get. Mark, who'd contributed nothing to Phoenix beyond lukewarm coffee break critiques and the occasional, interesting, before promptly forgetting everything I'd said. "Sarah, come in, sit down," Henderson said, his voice a little too hearty. He gestured vaguely towards the chair opposite Mark. I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, a premonition already settling like a stone in my gut. "As you know," Henderson began, steepling his fingers and avoiding my direct gaze, "the Phoenix Initiative presentation is next week. It's a make-or-break moment for this quarter, for the company even." I nodded. "Yes, sir. I've finalized the presentation deck, the updated projections are in, and I've run through the Q&A scenarios multiple times. I'm ready." I tried to inject confidence into my voice, the confidence I genuinely felt in my work, in my project. Henderson cleared his throat. "Excellent, excellent. Your groundwork has been commendable, Sarah. Truly. However, for a presentation of this magnitude, we need a certain presence, a commanding voice to really sell it to the board. Someone with, shall we say, a more established track record in these high-stakes pitches." My heart began to thud, a slow, painful beat against my ribs. I knew where this was going. I could see the predatory gleam in Mark's eyes. "So," Henderson continued, finally glancing at Mark with an approving nod, "I've decided that Mark will be leading the presentation. He'll be the face of Phoenix for the board." The words hit me like a physical blow. 2 years. 2 years of my life, my ideas, my relentless, exhausting effort. Countless evenings I'd stayed late, weekends I'd sacrificed, the social events I'd missed, all poured into Phoenix. My Phoenix. And now, just like that, it was being handed to Mark on a silver platter. Mark, who barely understood the fundamental algorithms I'd designed, let alone the nuanced market strategy I'd spent months perfecting. I struggled to find my voice. "Mr. Henderson," I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to control it. "With all due respect, I built Phoenix from the ground up. I know every single detail, every strength, every potential challenge. I am the most qualified person to present it." Henderson waved a dismissive hand. "Now, Sarah, don't be emotional. It's a strategic decision. Mark has a particular rapport with some of the board members, and frankly, this gives him an opportunity to step up. It's about team synergy. Team synergy." The phrase felt like acid on my tongue. Mark just sat there, looking like the cat that got the cream. That got my cream. He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He looked entitled. The humiliation was a burning wave that washed over me. Not just the injustice of it, but the casual, almost indifferent way my contributions were being erased, handed over to someone who'd done nothing to earn them. It was the culmination of years of being overlooked, of my ideas being rephrased by male colleagues in meetings and then lauded as brilliant, of being told to be less assertive when I defended my work. This wasn't just about Phoenix. It was about my worth, my career, my voice. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something at work, only to see someone else waltz in and take all the credit or be sidelined when it mattered most? It's a devastating feeling, isn't it? Like a punch to the gut that leaves you breathless. Share your story in the comments below. Let's connect over this, because I know I wasn't the first, and sadly won't be the last. And please, Consider subscribing if you want to find out how I refuse to let them bury me or my work. Leaving Henderson's office that day, I felt hollowed out, invisible. They thought I'd just quietly accept this, file it away under another unfair day at the office. They saw me as diligent, yes, but also as pliable, someone who wouldn't make waves. They underestimated me. They underestimated my resilience, my intellect, and most importantly, they had absolutely no idea what I had been quietly building in the background, the real ace up my sleeve. They thought they were closing a door on me. Little did they know, they were about to witness a demolition, and I was holding the detonator. My revenge wouldn't just be sweet, it would be a spectacle. That decision about the Phoenix presentation wasn't an isolated incident. It was the rotten cherry on top of a very moldy cake. Working at Innovate Solutions under Mr. Henderson had been a masterclass in navigating a minefield of ego, favoritism, and thinly veiled sexism. From the moment I joined, fresh-faced and eager, I noticed the subtle currents. Henderson, a man who clearly believed charisma trumped competence, had his inner circle, and it was an exclusive boys' club. Mark Jenkins, with his slicked-back hair and even slicker schmoozing skills, was its poster child. I remember my first major project proposal, a data analytics system that would streamline our client reporting. I'd spent weeks on it, crunching numbers, developing flowcharts, even creating a mock-up. I presented it to Henderson, who listened with a distracted air, nodding occasionally. The next week, at the all-hands meeting, he announced a new, exciting initiative for client reporting, and who was tasked to lead it using a suspiciously similar framework to mine. Mark Jenkins. When I'd tentatively pointed out the similarities, Henderson had just chuckled and said, "Great minds think alike, Sarah. Glad you're on board with Mark's vision." Mark's vision. My stomach had twisted into a knot of pure frustration. I felt like I was screaming into a void. Then there were the meetings. Oh, the meetings. I'd make a suggestion, lay out a logical argument, only to be met with polite, dismissive silence. Or worse, Henderson would say something like, "Good thought, Sarah. We'll keep it in mind," and then immediately turn to Mark or another male colleague for their real input. 5 minutes later, Mark would rephrase my exact point, perhaps with a more booming voice or a confident swagger, and Henderson would beam. "Excellent, Mark. That's the kind of innovative thinking we need." I'd sit there clenching my jaw, feeling the blood rush to my face. It was infuriating, like being gaslighted on a daily basis. I started to document everything, every idea, every email, a habit born out of sheer necessity for self-preservation. The sexism wasn't always overt, not the kind you could easily call out to HR without sounding oversensitive, that classic corporate trap. It was in the way Henderson would ask me to take notes in meetings, even when I was the lead analyst on the subject. It was in the honey and sweetheart comments slipped into conversations. It was in the way Mark would interrupt me mid-sentence, then look surprised when I didn't just fade into the wallpaper. He once joked during a team lunch that I was too intense about my work, that I needed to lighten up a bit. This, from a man whose most intense work involved perfecting his golf swing with clients. Mark wasn't just a passive beneficiary of Henderson's favoritism, he actively cultivated it. He was a master of corporate politics, always ready with a compliment for Henderson, always laughing loudest at his jokes, always positioning himself to be in the right place at the right time. He'd casually drop by my desk when I was deep in work on Phoenix, asking vague questions, peering at my screen. I'd be polite, guardedly explaining concepts. Later, I'd hear snippets of my own analysis, my own phrases, coming out of his mouth in Henderson's office, presented as his own brilliant insights. He was a vampire, sucking the credit and life out of my efforts. The Phoenix Initiative itself was born out of this frustration. I saw a gap in the market, a huge untapped potential our company was uniquely positioned to exploit. I knew if I could develop something truly groundbreaking, something undeniably mine, they couldn't ignore me, they couldn't steal it so easily. So I worked in the shadows initially, using my own time, sketching out the framework, building the business case. When I finally presented the initial concept to Henderson, it was so well researched, so meticulously planned, that even he couldn't dismiss it outright. He was, however, skeptical. "Ambitious, Sarah. very ambitious. "Are you sure you can handle this?" "Yes, sir," I'd said, my voice firm. "I am." He'd reluctantly given me the green light, but with minimal resources and even less overt support. Mark, of course, had scoffed. "Another one of Sarah's pet projects," I overheard him telling another colleague by the water cooler. "It'll never get off the ground." That condescending tone, that utter dismissal of my capabilities, it fueled me. Every late night, every complex problem I solved for Phoenix was a silent rebuttal to their doubts, to their ingrained biases. I navigated interdepartmental roadblocks, fought for budget allocations, and single-handedly built the core architecture of the initiative. I'd often be the last one to leave the office. The glow of my monitor, the only light in the vast, empty space. The silence broken only by the hum of the servers and the frantic tapping of my keys. It was lonely, grueling work, but Phoenix was becoming something extraordinary, and it was mine. Or so I thought. The more successful it looked, the more Mark started sniffing around, offering help, trying to insert himself. And Henderson, predictably, started seeing it as his potential triumph, conveniently forgetting his initial skepticism and my solitary struggle. The groundwork for the ultimate betrayal was being laid, brick by painful brick. Amidst the daily grind of microaggressions and stolen credit, there was one person who saw through the charade, one individual who genuinely recognized my capabilities. That was Ms. Eleanor Vance. She was a senior executive from our parent company, a formidable woman in her late 50s with a reputation for sharp intellect and no-nonsense efficiency. She'd visit our branch occasionally, a whirlwind of focused energy, and Henderson and his cronies would practically trip over themselves trying to impress her. They saw her as a powerful figure to be placated, but I saw her as something else entirely, a beacon of competence in a sea of mediocrity. Our first significant interaction happened about a year into my development of the Phoenix Initiative. Henderson had reluctantly agreed to let me present an early-stage progress report during one of Ms. Vance's visits, probably hoping I'd flounder and he could then rescue the situation. I was nervous, not of Ms. Vance herself, but of the inevitable condescension from Henderson and Mark, who were also in the room. I presented my data, my projections, my strategic roadmap for Phoenix. I spoke clearly, passionately, backing up every assertion with solid evidence. Henderson interrupted a few times with clarifying questions that were clearly designed to undermine me, and Mark chimed in with a few unhelpful, vague comments. But Ms. Vance listened intently, her gaze unwavering. She didn't interrupt. She just absorbed. When I finished, there was a brief silence. Henderson started to speak, probably to offer some patronizing summary, but Ms. Vance held up a hand, a small, decisive gesture that silenced him instantly. "Ms. Miller," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. "This is impressive, very impressive. Your analytical depth is remarkable, and the potential you've identified is significant." I felt a warmth spread through me, a feeling I hadn't realized I'd been so starved of. Validation. Genuine, unadulterated validation. She then turned to Henderson and Mark. "Frankly," she said, her eyes coolly assessing them, "I haven't seen this level of innovative foresight come out of this branch in quite some time. What resources are you allocating to support Ms. Miller in bringing this to fruition?" Henderson stammered something about full support, while Mark suddenly looked very interested in the pattern of the carpet. Ms. Vance didn't press them further in that moment, but her point had been made, sharp as a tack. After that meeting, Ms. Vance made it a point to seek me out on her subsequent visits. Sometimes it was a quick coffee, other times a brief chat in the hallway. She never overtly criticized Henderson or the office culture, but she had a way of asking probing questions that made me feel seen. "How are you navigating the internal politics on this, Sarah?" she'd ask. Or, "What are the real roadblocks you're facing beyond the technical ones?" She understood. She didn't offer direct intervention. That wasn't her style, nor her primary role during those visits. But her quiet encouragement was like a lifeline. She'd share small anecdotes from her own career, stories of overcoming obstacles, of dealing with dismissive colleagues. She never preached, but she led by example. She was everything I aspired to be, intelligent, respected, and undeniably in control. She saw the fire in me, the dedication I poured into Phoenix, while others just saw a quiet woman they could easily sideline. I remember one particular conversation. I was feeling particularly disheartened after Mark had taken credit for a crucial breakthrough I'd made on Phoenix during a progress update with Henderson. I bumped into Ms. Vance near the elevators. She took one look at my face and said, "Long day?" I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Don't let them grind you down, Sarah," she said softly, but with an underlying steel. "Your work speaks for itself, even if some people are determined not to listen. Keep meticulous records, and remember, true talent eventually finds its light. Sometimes you just have to be patient and strategic about when and how you switch on the spotlight." Her words stayed with me. Meticulous records. I was already doing that, but her confirmation of its importance hardened my resolve. Strategic about when and how you switch on the spotlight. That phrase echoed in my mind, planting a seed. She wasn't just an ally. She was, in her own subtle way, a mentor. She didn't give me the answers, but she helped me find the courage to look for them and to prepare for the moment I could no longer be ignored. Her belief in me, even from a distance, was a quiet force that helped me keep going when the urge to just give up was almost overwhelming. She was the exception that proved the rule in that toxic environment, a reminder that not everyone in a position of power was blind or self-serving. After that devastating meeting where Henderson handed Phoenix over to Mark, something inside me shifted. The despair was still there, a cold knot in my chest. But beneath it, a different kind of fire started to burn, a cold, determined rage. They thought they had won. They thought I would just fade away. They were wrong. While they were busy congratulating themselves, and Mark was clumsily trying to get a handle on the complex details of my project, I was activating a plan I had been quietly, meticulously cultivating for months, a contingency born from the constant erosion of my trust in Henderson and the corporate structure. My silent rise wasn't about climbing the ladder within Innovate Solutions anymore. That ladder was clearly greased for people like Mark. It was about building my own ladder on my own terms. For over a year, long before the Phoenix betrayal, I had started exploring avenues outside the company. The constant dismissal of my work, the stolen ideas, they were a bitter pill, but they also forced me to look beyond the confines of my cubicle. I began attending industry conferences and networking events, not as Sarah Miller from Innovate Solutions, but just as Sarah Miller, a data scientist with a passion for innovation. I started small, just listening, absorbing. Then I began to participate, asking questions, offering insights in panel discussions. I was nervous at first, my voice sometimes shaky, but I pushed through. To my surprise, people listened. People from other companies, respected figures in the field. They engaged with my ideas. They saw the value I brought. It was a stark contrast to my daily experience at Innovate. During this time, I had also been working on a side project, something completely separate from Phoenix, something that was entirely mine. It was a sophisticated predictive analytics model for a niche market, an idea that had sparked during my research for Phoenix, but was too specialized for Innovate's broader focus. I poured my evenings and weekends into it, coding, testing, refining. It was my intellectual sanctuary, a place where my ideas couldn't be stolen or belittled. Ms. Vance's advice about meticulous records and switching on the spotlight became my mantra. I had always been diligent about documenting my work on Phoenix, every line of code, every strategic decision, every email exchange. Now, I compiled it all into an unassailable dossier, a detailed history of my intellectual property. But I also began to strategically, subtly, lay the groundwork for my exit and my next move. Through my networking, I had made a few key contacts. One of them was a venture capitalist, David Chen, who specialized in tech startups. We'd had a fascinating conversation at a conference about the future of AI in financial modeling. I hadn't pitched him anything then, just shared my thoughts. But the seed was planted. As Mark fumbled his way through Understanding Phoenix, often calling me with panicked questions, which I answered with cool, professional detachment, giving him just enough rope to hang himself with, but no more. I was polishing my own independent project. I was also taking online courses in business management and intellectual property law, arming myself with knowledge. I learned about patent applications, about forming a company, about negotiating contracts. I was transforming myself from an undervalued employee into a potential entrepreneur. The beauty of it was that Henderson and Mark were so caught up in their own self-congratulatory bubble, so convinced of my meekness, that they never suspected a thing. They saw me at my desk, quietly doing my work, the work they still relied on me for, even as they prepared to strip me of the credit. They saw compliance. They didn't see the late nights I spent video conferencing with potential partners for my own venture. They didn't see the discreet meetings I was having with David Chen, who, after I finally presented my independent project to him, became incredibly enthusiastic. He saw the potential I had been shouting about for years, potential Henderson had been too blind or too biased to acknowledge. David didn't just see a good idea. He saw a founder. He saw the grit, the expertise, the quiet determination that had been forged in the fires of Innovate Solutions. So, as the date of the Phoenix presentation loomed, the one Mark was set to lead, I wasn't just seething in silence. I was preparing. I was building. I was rising, not in their world, but in my own. They thought they were about to showcase their triumph with my work. They had no idea that I was about to unveil a triumph of my own, one that would render theirs utterly, embarrassingly irrelevant. The stage was being set, not just for their presentation, but for my liberation. If this story of fighting back and building something new resonates with you, hit that like button to support more content like this. It really helps the channel grow and reach others who might need this inspiration. The day of the Phoenix Initiative presentation arrived, cloaked in a heavy sense of anticipation. At least for Henderson and Mark, the main boardroom was packed. The entire board of directors was there, along with key investors, and to my surprise, Ms. Eleanor Vance, seated at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. Henderson was practically vibrating with nervous excitement, fussing over Mark, who looked like he was about to accept an Oscar, his suit a little too tight, his smile a little too wide. I sat quietly in the back, an observer, a ghost they had already dismissed. They'd allowed me to attend, a patronizing gesture, as if to say, "See what your little project has become in capable hands?" Mark strode to the podium, Henderson beaming at him like a proud father. The presentation began, and it was a disaster. Mark, armed with my slides he clearly hadn't bothered to truly understand, stumbled through the introduction. He mispronounced key technical terms. He presented data points out of context. When he tried to explain the core algorithm, the heart of Phoenix that I had spent months perfecting, he became a tangled mess of buzzwords and jargon, his confident facade cracking with every hesitant and ah. I watched, a strange calmness settling over me. This wasn't just incompetence, it was a spectacular implosion. The board members started to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Whispers rippled through the room. Henderson's smile began to twitch. Then came the Q&A. The first question, a sharp, technical inquiry from a notoriously meticulous board member, Mr. Davies, completely blindsided Mark. He stammered, looked wildly at Henderson for help, who could only offer a forced, reassuring grimace. Mark tried to bluff his way through, but Mr. Davies, a man who suffered no fools, pressed him, exposing Mark's utter lack of understanding. The room grew colder. Investors were exchanging concerned glances. It was at this precise moment, as Mark was drowning in a sea of his own ineptitude, that Ms. Vance chose to speak. Her voice cut through the tense silence, clear and authoritative. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, her gaze piercing, "it's evident you're struggling with the foundational aspects of this initiative. Perhaps you could elaborate on the risk mitigation strategies for the beta phase rollout, specifically concerning data integrity as outlined in the original proposal." Mark's face went pale. He had no idea. That section of the proposal was something I had meticulously detailed, something he clearly hadn't even read, let alone absorbed. He mumbled something incoherent about robust protocols and team effort. Ms. Vance didn't let up. And the intellectual property safeguards for the proprietary algorithms? Who precisely architected those, and what steps were taken to secure them prior to this wider discussion? Mark looked like a deer caught in headlights. Henderson tried to interject. "Eleanor, perhaps we can—" But Ms. Vance wasn't looking at Henderson. She was looking directly at me. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod. That was my cue, the spotlight she'd spoken of. I stood up. My legs felt surprisingly steady. All eyes in the room turned to me, first with surprise, then with dawning curiosity. "If I may, Ms. Vance, Mr. Henderson, members of the board," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the suddenly silent room. "I believe I can address those points. As the sole architect of the Phoenix Initiative, from its conceptualization 2 years ago to the final coding of its core algorithms and the development of its comprehensive strategic plan, including all risk mitigation and IP protection protocols, I am intimately familiar with every aspect." A collective gasp seemed to suck the air out of the room. Henderson's jaw dropped. Mark looked like he'd seen a ghost, the ghost of his stolen glory. I walked calmly to the front of the room, took the clicker from Mark's limp hand, he didn't even resist, and brought up a hidden slide in the presentation. A slide I had embedded deep within the file, password protected. A slide detailing my authorship, my timelines, my original design documents, all time-stamped and digitally signed. "The Phoenix Initiative," I continued, my voice unwavering, "is indeed a powerful tool. One that I poured 2 years of my life into, often working alone with minimal support to bring to this stage." I then proceeded to answer Mr. Davies's and Ms. Vance's questions with precision and depth, demonstrating a mastery of the material that Mark could only dream of. I didn't just answer. I elaborated, I contextualized, I showcased the true potential of what I had built. The board members were now looking at Henderson and Mark with expressions ranging from disbelief to outright anger. The investors were leaning forward, their attention fully captured, not by Mark's bluster, but by my quiet competence. Then, for the final crushing blow, I said, "And while the Phoenix Initiative represents a significant achievement, it is for me a chapter that is now closing." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. My focus has shifted to a new venture. I clicked to my final slide. It was the logo of my new company, Nova Insight Analytics, and beneath it, in bold letters, "Secured $5 million in Series A funding from Chen Capital." The silence in the room was absolute, then broken by a low whistle from one of the investors. Henderson looked like he was about to faint. His face was a mask of utter shock and dawning horror. Mark simply stared, his smugness completely gone, replaced by a look of abject humiliation. He had been publicly, spectacularly unmasked. "Ms." Vance allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She looked at Henderson. "Well, Robert," she said, her voice laced with an icy calm that was more damning than any shout. "It appears Innovate Solutions has not only mismanaged the presentation of a key initiative but has also, it would seem, profoundly mismanaged its most valuable talent. This is deeply concerning." The air crackled with the unspoken. The humiliation for Henderson and Mark wasn't just professional, it was personal, played out on the biggest stage they had, in front of the people whose opinions mattered most. They had tried to erase me, and in doing so, they had only succeeded in spotlighting their own incompetence and duplicity. My revenge wasn't loud or aggressive, it was precise, surgical, and utterly devastating, delivered through the undeniable power of truth and competence. The aftermath of that board meeting was swift and brutal, for Henderson and Mark at least. For me, it was the dawn of a new era. As the board members and investors filed out, many of them made a point of stopping to speak with me, offering congratulations, expressing interest in Nova Insight Analytics, and, in some cases, offering thinly veiled apologies for not seeing the situation at Innovate Solutions more clearly. The power dynamic in that room had not just shifted, it had been entirely inverted. My resignation letter was on Henderson's desk before he even had a chance to recover from the shock. It was short, professional, and effective immediately. There was no need for a lengthy explanation. The board meeting had said it all. The next day, Henderson called me. His voice, usually so booming and self-assured, was now small, almost pleading. "Sarah," he began, I think there's been a misunderstanding. A terrible misjudgment on my part. We value you tremendously here. Perhaps we can discuss a new role? A significant raise? We need you on the Phoenix Initiative. You're essential to it. I listened, a cool sense of detachment washing over me. The desperation in his voice was almost pathetic. This was the man who had dismissed me, belittled me, and tried to hand my life's work to his favorite. Mr. Henderson, I replied, my tone even and firm. There's no misunderstanding. My decision is final. As for the Phoenix Initiative, I provided all the necessary documentation and groundwork. I'm sure with your strategic leadership, you and Mark will manage. The unspoken or not hung heavily in the air. There was a satisfying silence on the other end of the line. He tried again. But Sarah, think of your career. This is a setback for you too, leaving like this. I almost laughed. A setback, Mr. Henderson? I just launched my own company with $5 million in funding. I think my career is doing just fine. The only setback I see is the one Innovate Solutions is about to face when they try to move forward with a project whose architect has just walked out the door, taking her true innovations with her. Mark also tried to reach out, sending a fumbling, awkward email full of half apologies and attempts to downplay his role in the debacle. I was just following Henderson's lead, he wrote. I always admired your work on Phoenix. I didn't even bother to reply. His insincerity was palpable even through the screen. Their apologies, if you could even call them that, were too little, too late, and transparently self-serving. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry they got caught. They were sorry they had underestimated me so profoundly. The news of what happened in that boardroom, and my subsequent departure and startup launch, spread like wildfire through the company and then the wider industry. Henderson's reputation took a massive hit. I heard through the grapevine that Ms. Vance initiated a thorough review of his branch's management practices. Mark Jenkins reportedly became persona non grata, his credibility shot. The Phoenix Initiative, without its true architect and with its leadership thoroughly discredited, apparently stalled, plagued by technical difficulties and a lack of clear direction. It was a quiet, ignominious end for something that held so much promise when it was in my hands. For me, life transformed. Launching Nova Insight Analytics was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, but it was mine. I was building a team based on merit, respect, and collaboration. Everything that had been missing at Innovate Solutions. I made sure our company culture was one where every voice was heard, where credit was given where it was due, and where talent, regardless of gender or connections, could flourish. Ms. Vance became an informal mentor and even a client. She'd call occasionally, not just for business, but to check in, offering her wisdom and support. You showed them, Sarah, she said to me once, a note of pride in her voice. You showed them all. And I had. I had shown them that competence and integrity eventually triumph over cronyism and deceit. I had established new boundaries, not just for myself, but as an example for anyone else who had ever been made to feel small or invisible. The tables hadn't just turned. I had flipped the whole damn table over and built a new one to my own design. Looking back on that whole ordeal at Innovate Solutions, it's clear that what felt like a series of crushing defeats was actually forging the path to my greatest victory. The constant undermining, the stolen credit, the blatant favoritism. It was painful, yes, deeply so. There were so many days I wanted to scream or just walk away. But each instance of injustice, each dismissive remark became another piece of fuel for the fire that was growing inside me. It taught me resilience. It taught me the critical importance of documenting my work, of knowing my worth even when others refused to see it. And most importantly, it taught me that sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to stop playing by their rules and create your own. My revenge, as satisfying as it was to witness Henderson and Mark's public humiliation, wasn't really about them in the end. It was about me reclaiming my narrative, my work, and my future. It was about proving to myself more than anyone that I was more than the quiet, diligent worker they tried to keep in a box. True empowerment isn't just about standing up to those who try to diminish you. It's about building something better, something that reflects your own values, where you define the terms of your success. Nova Insight Analytics is that for me. It's a testament to the idea that innovation and integrity can and should go hand in hand. The journey was far from easy. There were moments of profound self-doubt, of loneliness, of wondering if I was just being naive to think I could make such a drastic change. But the memory of Ms. Vance's quiet encouragement, the belief David Chen showed in my vision, and ironically, the sheer audacity of Henderson and Mark's actions all kept me moving forward. They inadvertently gave me the push I needed to take the biggest risk of my career, and it paid off in ways I could never have imagined while I was still trapped in that toxic environment. My story isn't unique, unfortunately. So many talented individuals, especially women, face similar challenges in corporate environments that are slow to change, that still value bluster over substance, or connections over competence. They're made to feel invisible, their contributions minimized, their ambitions questioned. But what I learned is that your value isn't determined by those who refuse to see it. Your worth is inherent. Sometimes, the greatest act of defiance, the greatest form of revenge, is to succeed on your own terms, to build your own platform so high that they can no longer ignore you, or better yet, so high that their opinions no longer matter. What would you have done in my place? How have you navigated similar situations of injustice or being undervalued at work? I'd genuinely love to hear your experiences and your strategies for overcoming these hurdles. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to hear today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more stories of turnaround and triumph. Let's continue to build a community where we lift each other up and show the world the true power of resilience and self-belief. Because ultimately, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's thriving, authentically, and unapologetically.